Sophie lay twisted in the hay, blood pooling beneath her cheek, her leg bent at an angle no child should survive. Storm, the broken, half-wild horse they'd rescued for $5 at the farmer's market, was rearing over her, hooves crashing down inches from her skull. Ethan's hands trembled around the shotgun. One more stomp, one more breath too late, and he'd be forced to pull the trigger. On the very creature his daughter had sworn she could save. 3 days ago, he'd brought this horse home, thinking it was just an old, wounded animal in need of kindness. Now, that decision might cost him everything. Was it an act of mercy, or the mistake that would destroy the rest of his life? If that gave you chills, go ahead and tap that like button. It lets me know you're hooked. And I've got to ask, would you have trusted that horse? Really? After what it did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And hey, where are you reading from? Always love seeing where these stories are reaching. The sun had been hanging heavy all day, cooking the sidewalks until they shimmered like water. Heat clung to everything, shirts, skin, even the wooden stalls at the farmer's market. Flies circled the corn bins, and the scent of ripe peaches battled with the sweat of 100 passers-by. Ethan Miller squinted against the glare, his thumb hooked casually in his belt as he trailed behind his daughter. Sophie walked ahead of him, weaving through the crowd like she'd lived in Clearbrook her whole life. In truth, it had only been 10 months since they moved here from a city filled with sirens and sirens' ghosts. He had buried a piece of himself the day they left, right next to his wife and their unborn son. Sophie was the only part of that life he had left. He thought small-town policing might be safer, slower, the kind of work where a man still had time to breathe, to be a father, and maybe, just maybe, to sleep through the night without dreaming of blood or broken glass. "Can we go see the goats again?" Sophie asked without turning. "We already saw 'em twice," he said, his voice quiet but not stern. "They'll still be there next Saturday, pumpkin." They rounded the end of the last row, where the vendors started to thin and the pavement gave way to dry grass. That's when Sophie stopped cold. A man was sitting on an upturned bucket near the edge of the lot. His skin was burnt dark by sun and years, his beard yellowed at the tips. Beside him stood a horse, or what was left of one. Its coat was the color of ash, patchy and filthy, clinging to bones like wet paper on a fence post. Scars ran across its legs and up its chest. One eye was cloudy, the other narrow and mean. A crooked cardboard sign leaned against a rusted feed bucket. $5 for the old bastard. Ethan reached out, resting a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Let's keep walking." But she didn't move. The horse jerked its head violently, yanking the rope tied to a splintered post. The man yanked it back hard, smacking the creature's muzzle with the flat of his palm. "Told ya," he barked. "Ain't no good. Won't let me touch him unless I got a board in my hand." Sophie turned to her father, eyes wide and wet. "Daddy, please." Ethan sighed. "Sophie, honey, you can't fix everything that's broken. That animal's wild. You saw it. But he's hurt, Daddy. Look at him. Somebody's been hurting him for years and nobody's done nothing. That's not fair. You always say we're supposed to help people and animals too." Ethan watched the horse toss its head again, baring yellow teeth at the man holding its rope. It wasn't fear that showed in that creature's eyes. It was hate. Pure, ragged hate, the kind Ethan had seen before. He'd seen it in addicts, in convicts, in men with nothing left but fists. "He ain't safe," Ethan muttered. Sophie stepped closer to him, standing on the toes of her sneakers to look him straight in the eye. "I'll take care of him. I'll do the feeding, the brushing. I won't ask for nothing else, ever again. Please. I'll even give up cartoons for a whole month." He huffed a little at that, rubbing the back of his neck. "Cartoons ain't exactly a bargaining chip, kiddo." Sophie dropped her gaze. Mom would have helped him. Ethan flinched. She didn't mean it cruel, but grief didn't need to be sharp to cut. It just needed to show up. He turned back toward the man. "You serious about selling him for $5?" The man grinned, showing gray teeth. "Hell yeah. Damn thing's been nothing but trouble. Won't pull, won't carry, damn near bit my hand off last week. Take him and good riddance." Ethan pulled out his wallet, thumbed past the 20s, and slid out a crumpled 5. "If he kills me, I'm sending his hide to you in a box." The man snatched the bill, already standing. "He ain't my problem no more." As the man disappeared into the crowd, Ethan reached slowly for the rope. The horse, Storm, as Sophie would call him, snorted and jerked back. He held the rope firm, not yanking, just waiting. The tension hummed like a live wire between them. And then slowly the horse lowered its head. Sophie beamed, eyes brighter than they'd been in months. "Storm," she whispered. "That's his name. He's been living in a storm for so long. Now he gets to come home." The walk back to their truck took nearly an hour. Storm bucked twice, reared once, and nearly kicked through a flower stand. But Ethan didn't let go. Not once. When they got him home, Sophie opened the old wooden gate behind the barn, still paint-chipped from when Ethan's dad ran cattle there decades ago. "Go on," Sophie whispered to the horse, nudging him gently. "Ain't no one gonna hit you here." Storm didn't move for a long moment. Then, with a sound like a sigh mixed with a grunt, he limped through the gate and into the dry grass, where he stood in the shadow of the oak tree. Ethan leaned on the fence, arms crossed. "Well," he said, "there goes my retirement." Sophie leaned into him. "We're gonna fix him, Daddy. You'll see. He just needs someone to believe in him." Ethan didn't say anything, just watched the broken animal standing in the fading sun, still and silent, like he was trying to remember what freedom tasted like. The morning came quiet, save for the low whistle of wind through the slats of the old barn. Dew clung to the grass in silver beads, and somewhere off in the trees, a mourning dove called once, then fell silent. Sophie was up before the sun was fully over the ridge. She hadn't slept much, too wound up, too full of something she couldn't name. Excitement maybe, or worry, or maybe a little of both. She pulled on her jeans, yanked her hoodie over her head, and stepped outside barefoot, her shoes dangling from one hand. Storm was there, just where they'd left him, tethered to the inside of the barn stall. He hadn't touched the hay they left him. The water in the metal bucket was still as glass. He stood with one back leg cocked in a lazy angle, head lowered, eyes half-lidded, like he was waiting. "Hey, boy," she said softly, setting the bucket of fresh water down near the trough. Storm didn't move. Sophie approached slow, one hand out like she'd seen in the old horse training videos. When she got close enough, she brushed her fingers against his neck. The coat was coarse under the grime. Her fingers moved carefully down to where the leather halter sat, and that's when she felt it. A thick, deep ridge running across his throat. The kind of scar a chain collar might leave if it was tight and left too long. "Daddy!" she called, not loud, but with a tremble that carried. Ethan was halfway out the back door in seconds, still in his undershirt and work pants. He ducked into the barn and stood beside her, eyes narrowing as he gently traced the same mark she had. He didn't say anything at first, just looked. There were more along the ribs, under the belly, and a fresh-looking scab on the inside of the rear leg. "Son of a," he muttered, then stopped himself. "Somebody beat this animal near to death." Storm shifted his weight then, just enough to make Ethan back up half a step. The horse didn't kick, but there was tension in him, like a coiled spring just barely held in place. "I don't think it's just injuries," Ethan said, lowering his voice. "He's off," spooked deep down. Sophie laid her cheek against Storm's side. "He's just scared." "Scared animals bite," Ethan warned, but his voice wasn't sharp. It was tired, weighted. He didn't want to be right. Still, he let her stay. He let her brush the burrs from Storm's mane and speak to him in that soft, hopeful way kids have when they still believe kindness can fix everything. She told him about her old school, about how she didn't like the new one much, how the girls were mean and the teacher didn't smile. She told him about her mom, and the way her laugh used to fill up the house like it had windows wide open, and the breeze just blew through all easy. Storm didn't answer, of course, but once or twice he flicked an ear, and once, when she said something about the way her daddy used to come home with bandages and bruises, he let out a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a grunt. By the third day, he was eating a little. By the fifth, he let her touch his face without flinching. Ethan watched it all, from the shadows of the porch or the doorway of the barn, never getting too close. He didn't trust the horse. But more than that, he didn't trust himself to get close to anything that might break his daughter's heart again, until it almost did. It was the 8th morning. Sophie had already slipped out of bed before the rooster had the nerve to speak. She tiptoed past her daddy's room, careful not to wake him. He'd been working long shifts, and his shoulders always looked heavier when he slept. She figured he needed the rest more than she needed company. In the barn, Storm stood still. Not like the stillness of peace, more like a dog watching a thundercloud crawl over the horizon. His one good eye tracked her every step. The other was half-glazed, still bearing the fog of old pain. "Morning, boy," she said gently, walking with the little half-bounce of someone trying to hide a limp. She was still sore from the last stumble, but she didn't care. Storm had started letting her closer, hadn't he? She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a slice of red apple. "Got your favorite." He didn't move. She stepped closer. Then another step. "It's okay, Storm. I ain't gonna hurt you." And then everything shattered. The change came without warning. 1 second, she was extending her hand, and the next a crack of sound, a blur of motion, and then the full weight of the beast came alive. Storm reared up, nostrils flaring, mouth open in a silent scream. His front hooves crashed down, not on her, not yet, but close enough to splinter the stall gate beside her. Sophie screamed. Not a childish yelp, a real, raw, blood-drenched scream. She turned to run, slipped on wet hay, and that's when he came down. His hoof caught her shoulder and threw her sideways. She slammed into the wooden post, ribs crunching against aged pine. Another stomp missed her head by inches but caught her thigh with a thud so sickening even the doves outside took flight. Storm kept bucking, not at her, not directly, but the rage was blind now. Tail slashing, mouth snapping at ghosts only he could see. He kicked again, and this time caught her side. Something cracked. She didn't move after that. Ethan heard the crash before he heard the scream. The kind of crash that tears through bone. He ran faster than he had in 10 years. Barefoot, shirtless, shotgun in hand without remembering how it got there. He rounded the barn just as Storm's hooves came down a 4th time, narrowly missing his daughter's head again. Sophie lay twisted, blood leaking from her temple, her little arm bent wrong like a doll dropped too hard. No, no, no. Ethan didn't think. He raised the gun, finger on the trigger. His hands shook so bad he couldn't hold the sight steady. "Storm, get back!" he roared. Storm jerked toward him, eyes wild, sweat flying from his mane. For a breath, man and beast stood frozen. Then the horse backed away. Not far, just enough. Ethan dropped the gun and rushed to Sophie. She wasn't breathing right, gurgling, blood around her mouth. Her chest fluttered like a bird caught in a trap. He scooped her up, feeling the sick weight of a body that's not fighting back. Her pulse was there, barely, but her leg, God, her leg, it bent in 2 places it shouldn't bend. "Stay with me, baby," he whispered hoarsely, sprinting to the truck with her limp in his arms. "Stay with me, I got you." Storm stood at the barn door, watching them vanish in a cloud of gravel dust. And then he turned, walked to the corner of the stall, and stood still. All day. All night. Didn't eat. Didn't drink. The hospital smell hit Ethan like a slap antiseptic, and air that felt borrowed. He paced the corridor, hands shaking, shirt soaked in dried blood. He didn't remember the drive, didn't remember the tears, just remembered his daughter's breath hitching in the back seat. The doctor came out 4 hours later, face unreadable. "She's alive," he said. Ethan nearly collapsed. "She has 3 broken ribs, a fractured femur, and a concussion. Some internal bleeding, but nothing that can't be managed. She was lucky." Lucky. That word hung in Ethan's chest like a lead weight. He went in to see her once they let him. She looked so small in that bed, face swollen, arm in a cast, bruises blooming like ink across her skin. He sat beside her and waited for her to wake. When she finally opened her eyes, she blinked slow and whispered, "Is Storm okay?" Ethan just stared. She reached for his hand, voice cracked and raw. "You're not gonna hurt him, right?" Ethan didn't answer. He just turned his head away and let the weight of everything settle in his gut like a stone. Sophie was awake for less than a minute before the pain meds pulled her under again. But that 1 minute was enough to carve something deep into Ethan, deeper than anything he'd felt since the night the doctor pulled a sheet over his wife and newborn. She had asked about the damn horse, not about herself, not about how badly she was hurt, not about why she couldn't move her leg, just the horse. When the nurse stepped out, Ethan sat down, elbows on his knees, hands pressed against his eyes like he could hold himself together if he squeezed tight enough. The room hummed with the soft beeping of monitors and the slow puff of the oxygen machine. Outside the window, the parking lot lights flickered on one by one, as if the world didn't care what had happened. He cared. He cared more than he could stand. Sophie woke again later that evening. Her voice was thin as paper. "Daddy?" Ethan scooted close, taking her hand gently. "Yeah, baby, Daddy's here." Her eyes were still swollen from crying earlier. She swallowed. Did Storm eat anything yet?" That was it. The line snapped. "Stop," he said, sharper than he meant to. "Stop talking about that horse for one damn second." Sophie blinked at him, startled. "You almost died," he said, voice shaking. "You were under his feet, Sophie. Under him. You know what that means? You know what 1,000 pounds of animal can do to a little girl?" She tried to speak, but he held up a hand, breathing ragged. "You don't understand what I saw. I saw you not breathing right. I saw blood running out of your mouth. I thought..." His throat closed. "I thought I lost you, sweetheart." Her lip quivered. "But Daddy," Storm didn't mean. "You don't know what he meant," Ethan snapped, louder this time. "You think you do, but you're a kid, Sophie, and I'm your father. My job is to keep you alive, even when you hate me for it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't hate you." "Well, you're gonna," he said, pulling himself up straighter. "Because tomorrow morning Storm's going to the slaughter yard." Sophie gasped like he'd stabbed her. "No! Daddy, no! That animal nearly killed you." He was scared. "You were scared," Ethan shot back. "And that matters more to me than anything else on this earth." The room went silent after that, only the beep of the heart monitor, only the hum of the lights overhead. Sophie cried softly into her pillow. Ethan stood there helpless, knowing he'd just broken something between them but not knowing how else to protect her. He walked out of the room before he broke even more. Storm hadn't moved since the attack. Not all day. Not all night. He stood in the far back corner of the stall, head low, body trembling every so often like he was fighting off some internal storm only he could see. The hay under him had gone untouched. The bucket of water was still full. He ignored everything. When Ethan entered with the rope halter the next morning, Storm lifted his head the slightest inch, then lowered it again. No fight, no kick, no wild rage. Just a kind of tired sorrow that maybe only men who've lived through hell can recognize. "Should have expected this," Ethan muttered. "Should have known nothing good lasts long around here. Should have known trouble when I saw it." Storm didn't move. "Truck'll be here," Ethan said, as he looped the rope around the gate. "You're going. That's all there is to it." Storm flicked an ear. Barely. Ethan hated the way that tiny motion stung him. When Sophie came home 2 days later, arm in a sling, leg in a brace, bruises blooming on her face, Ethan thought she would go straight to the couch like any child in pain. She didn't. She went straight to the barn. He saw her from the kitchen window hobbling across the yard, almost falling twice, her face twisting with the effort. He rushed outside, calling after her, but she didn't stop. She slammed her small body against the barn door, forcing it open, and then her scream tore through the air. "No! You can't take him!" The men from the slaughter yard had already backed their trailer up to the barn door. One of them had Storm by the rope halter. Storm's legs trembled beneath him. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He looked resigned, like he'd been waiting to be punished. Sophie threw herself between the horse and the men. "You can't take him," she sobbed. "He's not bad. He's just hurt." Ethan reached her and grabbed her shoulders. "Sophie, stop. You'll get yourself hurt again." "No," she screamed, pushing his hands away. "You don't understand. You never understand." The men stepped back awkwardly, unsure what to do. Sophie turned to her father, tears streaming down her face, voice shaking like a broken string. "When Mom was alive," she said, "you used to come home all messed up, Daddy. You smelled like blood and smoke. You couldn't sleep. You couldn't breathe right. Sometimes you didn't even look like you knew where you were." Ethan froze. Sophie kept going. "You'd cry in the bathroom when you thought nobody heard, and you'd yell in your sleep, and sometimes you'd hit the wall because you were scared of things you saw at work." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "Mom helped you. She'd hold your face and say you were still good, even when you didn't believe her. She fixed your heart. She made you better." Ethan's breath left him in a long, shaking exhale. Sophie pressed her hand to Storm's neck. "Storm is like you, Daddy. He's hurt inside. He didn't mean to break me. He just got scared like you used to. And if I can fix him, that means I can fix you too." Her voice shrank to a whisper. "If I can help Storm, then maybe that means Mom isn't really gone. Not all the way." Ethan's face crumpled. He hadn't cried since the hospital. Not once. But he cried then. Big, shaking, helpless tears. He knelt down in front of his daughter and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the last good thing God left in the world. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry, baby girl." The men stood silently, removed their hats, eyes down. And then, a loud snap. Storm broke free. The rope popped like a gunshot. Storm charged forward, straight at Sophie. Ethan instinctively shielded her, ready to take the hit. But Storm stopped. So fast the dirt sprayed up around him. He dropped to his knees, then lowered his head, then pressed his muzzle to Sophie's bandaged leg, trembling all over like a man begging forgiveness. Sophie reached out with shaking hands. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm right here." Storm lowered his head all the way to the dirt. A bow, a promise, a plea. Ethan wiped his face with his sleeve, voice hoarse. "He's stayin'." Storm didn't move from the dirt floor for a long while. Sophie sat with him, her back against his trembling shoulder, arms still wrapped around his bowed neck. Ethan stood nearby, one hand resting on the barn doorframe, watching as the dust settled around them. The men from the slaughterhouse waited in silence a few paces back, holding their caps in their hands, heads low, as if they'd just witnessed a funeral or maybe a miracle they couldn't quite decide which. No one spoke. There was no need. When Storm finally rose, it was slow, like he didn't want to scare the girl again, didn't want to make another mistake. He stood tall, but his head hung low, the tip of his nose brushing Sophie's hair before he stepped back and stood quietly beside her. Ethan cleared his throat, finally turning to the men. "That'll be all," he said, voice thick. "He's not going anywhere." They didn't argue, just nodded once and backed the trailer out slow. Tires crackled on gravel as the truck disappeared down the lane. The silence that followed felt heavy, but it didn't hurt anymore. It felt like peace. A quiet kind. The kind that took work to earn. It was slow going after that. Storm wouldn't take a saddle, wouldn't let anyone else near him except Sophie. But little by little, things changed. He began to eat again, though only when she fed him. He drank more water when she sat by the trough and hummed soft tunes her mother used to sing in the kitchen. His eyes softened. The tremble in his muscles faded. Sophie's bruises stayed for weeks. Her leg took longer to heal, but she didn't complain much, not after that day. Ethan tried not to think about how close he'd come to burying another person he loved. But sometimes he'd wake in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, just the same as when he worked homicide in the city, and go stand by the barn, shotgun in hand, just to make sure everything was still where it should be. He caught himself watching Storm differently now, not as a threat, but as a reminder. That pain never really left a soul, not even an animal. That grief stuck, and sometimes it came out in teeth and hooves and fists if you weren't careful. But healing, well, that came in quiet things, in time, in trust, in second chances. One morning near the end of August, the air shifted. Summer hadn't let go yet, but fall was peeking through the cracks. Cool mornings, leaves tinged yellow at the edges, the scent of wood smoke somewhere far off. Sophie was out by the barn drawing again. She'd taken to sketching Storm and taping the drawings to the barn wall like art in a gallery. The horse stood beside her as still as a statue, occasionally flicking his tail or nudging her arm when she forgot to pay attention to him. Ethan stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching his daughter laugh. It was the first time he'd seen that in months, maybe longer. He was just about to step outside when the barking started. Not normal barking. Violent, close. He turned fast. Next door, old Calvin Dobbs' gate had swung open, and his mastiff Rufus, a hulking black dog with more muscle than sense, was loose and charging full speed toward Sophie. The dog was foam-lipped, snarling, eyes locked. Sophie. Ethan's mug shattered against the floor as he bolted out the door. But Storm moved faster. The horse didn't hesitate. He didn't freeze, didn't rear, didn't flinch. He bolted from the paddock like a lightning strike, putting himself between Sophie and the charging dog just as the beast lunged. Storm kicked. Once. The sound was sickening bone on bone. Rufus yelped, hit the dirt, and rolled. He limped off, whining, tail between his legs. But Storm didn't walk away clean. His leg, his already bad leg, had taken the brunt of the impact when he twisted to protect Sophie. He collapsed to one knee, breathing heavy, foam dripping from his lips, but he stayed upright, stayed alert. Sophie fell to her knees beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You saved me," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his mane. "You saved me." Ethan finally reached them, chest heaving, fear still thudding through his ribs. He didn't speak at first. He just dropped to one knee beside them both and reached out slowly, placing his palm on Storm's sweat-drenched side. "Thank you," he said. "You big, broken miracle." Storm leaned into him, just for a second. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't feel fear anymore. Only gratitude. Only awe. Only something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Home. That night, they all sat on the porch together. Sophie in her favorite flannel pajamas, drawing in her sketch pad. Ethan in his old chair, watching the sky turn that soft orange pink he remembered from childhood. Storm lay in the yard, his bad legs stretched out, the rest of him calm and quiet. "Daddy," Sophie said, not looking up. "Do you think Mama would have liked him?" Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that hurt a little. "She'd have loved him, Pumpkin. She always had a soft spot for the ones that came in all banged up." "Like you?" Ethan laughed under his breath. "Yeah, like me." Sophie turned her drawing toward him. It showed a girl, a man, and a horse, all under a big oak tree, with the sun setting behind them. Above the tree, she'd written in crooked letters, "We fix each other." Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he leaned forward and kissed the top of her head. "You're your mother's daughter," he whispered. "Through and through." Sophie smiled. Storm snorted softly in the grass, and for the first time since the night he buried his wife, Ethan Miller felt whole again. Inside the barn, the old wind chimes his wife had once hung from the rafters clinked faintly, though the air was still. There were moments when the past slipped into the present, so quiet and so easy, it made a man wonder if ghosts weren't just memories we hadn't learned how to carry. He didn't go to bed right away. Instead, he stayed out there on the porch long past 10, then walked the fence line with a flashlight in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. Routine, comfort, the little habits that kept the edges from fraying too fast. He'd just crawled under the covers, barely settled, when the noise hit. A shriek, high, piercing, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a quiet place. It wasn't human. It was Storm. Ethan was out of bed before he even thought about moving. His feet hit the hardwood like thunder, his breath already shallow by the time he yanked open the back door. The night was thick, moonless, humid, the kind of dark that pressed up against your skin. But that sound, Storm's voice, if you could call it that, was unmistakable. By the time Ethan reached the barn, flashlight bouncing wildly in his grip, Storm was thrashing in his stall. The gate rattled, dirt flew. His front hooves slammed into the wood so hard, the top rail cracked. "Whoa, Storm!" "Easy, easy, boy!" Ethan shouted, though the horse wasn't listening. Storm wasn't trying to break out aimlessly. He was pacing, focused, snorting hard, eyes locked on the back of the barn, toward the tree line beyond the fence. Ethan stepped closer, and the horse jerked once, nostrils flaring, then stamped hard again, right hoof down, 3 times in a row. Not wild, not random, a rhythm. Almost like he was trying to get a point across. Ethan's stomach turned cold. "Something out there?" he muttered, half to himself. Storm snorted again and shoved his head against the gate, hard enough to rattle the hinges. Ethan hesitated, then unlatched the stall. All right, show me." Storm didn't bolt. He stepped out slow but deliberate, as if this was something he'd done before, something ingrained in him. His head stayed low, eyes scanning ahead. He walked past Ethan and toward the fence at the back of the property. Ethan followed, heart thumping. There wasn't a lick of wind, but the leaves shifted overhead like they knew something he didn't. They reached the fence, and Storm stopped. He looked back once, just a flick of the head, then turned sideways and ducked under a low branch, disappearing into the tree line. Ethan swore under his breath, grabbed a flashlight, and followed. The woods behind Ethan's property weren't much scrub oak, tall pines, narrow trails where deer came down to drink. But in the dark, everything looked older, stranger. Like the woods didn't belong to the world anymore. Storm moved without hesitation. Slow, careful steps over old roots and fallen branches. He kept his ears back and his tail low, but his direction never wavered. Ethan had to duck more than once, branches clawing at his arms. Every now and then, Storm would pause, sniff the air, and change direction slightly. They walked like that for 15 minutes, maybe more. Then the trees broke open. A clearing, overgrown, wild. And in the center of it, half sunken into weeds, its roof caved in at one corner, stood a building. An old shipping depot, Ethan realized. Maybe used by ranchers back in the day to offload hay and feed, or horses. Storm stopped just shy of the edge of the clearing. Ethan stepped forward, sweeping his flashlight across the side of the structure. No paint left. Rust crept up the siding. Vines coiled over broken glass. He stepped onto the sagging porch. The floor groaned under his weight. When he reached the front door, barely hanging from one hinge, he gave it a push. It opened with a long, dry creak. The smell hit him first. Rot, rust. Something else, something sharp and old, like the tang of dried blood mixed with mold. He stepped inside. The flashlight beam swung over the interior. Metal cages, rows of them. Stacked, bent, some torn from the bolts that once held them down. There were feed troughs too, overturned, moldy. Pieces of rope hung from hooks on the walls, stiff with age. One was stained dark red. Ethan's throat tightened. Storm stayed at the doorway, eyes wide, breath shallow. But he didn't run. Ethan moved slowly, careful not to step on anything sharp. In one corner, he spotted a thick black leather whip curled like a dead snake. Nearby, a rusted branding iron, and next to it, a ledger. It was half covered in dirt and mouse droppings, but the spine was intact. Ethan brushed it off with a gloved hand, squatted, and opened it. Inside, pages and pages of handwritten notes. Dates, horse names, breeds, weights, codes like X12, X13, and finally near the end of the book, X14, hold for processing. There was no horse name next to that one, but Ethan didn't need it. He turned slowly and looked at Storm. "Was this you?" he whispered. Storm didn't move, just stood there, watching. Ethan turned back to the book. His fingers ran over the lines, reading entry after entry, some crossed out, others followed by numbers that looked an awful lot like dollar signs. "God help me," he muttered. He stood slowly, heart pounding in his chest. It came back to him then, a report from 2 years ago, rumors of an illegal horse ring. Someone had claimed they saw unmarked trailers at night, unloading in fields near the edge of Clearbrook. But the case had gone nowhere. No one followed through. He hadn't followed through. He didn't have proof then. He did now. Back at the barn, Storm wouldn't go inside. Not right away. He stood out in the moonlight for a long while, body tense, head lifted as if listening for something long gone. Then he stepped in, slow and deliberate, and collapsed into the straw like the weight of what he'd shown had finally worn him down. Ethan stood outside the stall, the ledger clutched in his hands. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, eyes on the pages in front of him, mind replaying the walk through the woods, the smell of that place, the look in Storm's eye. Sophie came downstairs just after dawn, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" He turned. She saw the open book, the flashlight, the boots still caked with mud. "What happened?" Ethan stood, walked over, and wrapped her in his arms. "I think your horse just led me to something real bad," he said quietly. Sophie looked up at him, worried. But he also might have saved a whole lot more than just us. It was just after breakfast when Ethan sat down at the dining table with the old case file spread out in front of him. The manila folder was cracked and soft around the edges, the kind that had been passed around a dozen desks, opened too many times, and forgotten in a drawer when something more urgent came along. He'd found it in the department archive, shoved behind a binder labeled Abandoned Livestock Complaints, 2000 and 2023. No one had touched it in almost 2 years. Sophie sat across from him, a piece of toast untouched on her plate, her pencil sketch pad resting in her lap. She wasn't drawing today, just listening, eyes flicking between the yellowed pages and her father's tired face. Ethan thumbed through the report slowly, squinting at the faded ink. Report came in early spring 2 years ago, he said. Neighbor out near the southern ridge claimed they saw a trailer full of horses coming in late at night. No tags, no plates. Said it wasn't the first time either. He pointed to a handwritten note in the margin, filed by Officer Glenn Dempsey. He marked it suspicious but not actionable. No photos, no warrant request, no follow-up. He tapped the paper. That's on us. Sophie didn't speak. Ethan leaned back in the chair, ran a hand through his hair, and sighed. I remember when this came in. I was still with the city PD. Too many cases on the books and not enough hands. Animal reports got buried, especially if there was no blood, no stolen property, no bodies. Sophie finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but steady. But there were bodies. Just not human. Ethan nodded. Yeah, you're right. He pulled the ledger Storm had led him to from his duffel bag and set it on the table. The pages were curling now from damp, but the writing was clear enough. Codes, names, and cash figures. And near the bottom of one page, in the same scrawled handwriting as the rest, was the entry that haunted him. X14. Hold for processing. That's the piece that connected everything. Storm wasn't just any horse. He was a survivor. Maybe the only one. The days after that discovery moved slow, like wading through water. Every few hours, Ethan found himself staring out the window at Storm, who spent most of his time pacing the fence line or standing near Sophie whenever she came outside. There was a shift in the way the horse carried himself now. Still quiet, still wary, but alert, focused. Twice that week, Ethan caught Storm facing the tree line at night, his body stiff, ears forward, like he was waiting for something, or someone. Then came the scare with the neighbor's horse. It was near sundown, and Sophie had been picking wildflowers in the tall grass by the back fence. Storm had been grazing near the barn, head low, tail flicking now and again. Ethan had just stepped out onto the porch when the Dobbs old stallion, a big, mean thing named Flint, busted through the rear fence like a battering ram. Ethan dropped his coffee mug and ran. Sophie screamed, dropping the flowers, turning to run. But she didn't have to. Storm had already moved. Before Ethan made it halfway down the steps, Storm had shoved himself between Sophie and the charging horse. No hesitation, no noise, just pure instinct. Flint slowed when he saw Storm, paused. They stared at each other. One wild, one broken. Storm didn't rear, didn't charge, just planted his hooves, dropped his head and stood there like a mountain. Flint huffed, pawed the ground twice, then turned and trotted off. Ethan reached Sophie just as she threw her arms around Storm's neck. He was protecting me, she whispered. He didn't even flinch. Later that night, after patching up the fence and calling the Dobbs family who offered little more than a grunt and a "he's never done that before," Ethan stood by the barn while Sophie brushed Storm's coat under the porch light. You think he's trained? She asked. Ethan took a breath. Not for farm work, not for riding either, but he reacts like he's seen trouble before. Like you? She said without looking up. He smiled, a sad, small smile. Maybe. They stood in silence a while, just the sounds of cicadas and the soft scrape of a brush through old fur. Then she said, Storm's not just a horse. No, Ethan replied. I don't reckon he is. He's a soul, Sophie said. A hurt soul, like the kind you can't see just by looking, but he still knows how to love, how to protect, and forgive. Ethan didn't say anything back. He didn't have to. She was right. Traspanned, one Dom, always Dom. That night, Ethan pulled up every archived incident report he could find anything involving animal transport, suspicious trailers, closed barns. One name kept surfacing like oil on water. Joe Carter, a former rancher turned livestock dealer. Used to run a small training camp out past Granger's Ridge. Had his license pulled 3 years ago after reports of abuse and improper handling came in. Horses gone missing. Illegal auction rumors. Nothing ever stuck. Ethan remembered the guy. Had even interviewed him once back when he was new to the county. Something about the man hadn't sat right. Too slick. Too polite. The kind of calm you didn't trust. One report mentioned a site used for temporary holding, a location referred to as Lot X or sometimes X14. Carter had claimed it was a quarantine pen for sick animals. No inspection ever confirmed it. Storm's code. X14. It hit Ethan like a stone to the chest. That wasn't a holding pen. It was a death sentence. And Storm had walked out of it. Or maybe run. Or maybe someone had let him go. He didn't know yet. But he was going to find out. In the days that followed, Ethan started digging deeper. He kept his investigation quiet off the record. He'd seen what happened when whispers got out too early. People moved, covered tracks, silenced things. He asked questions around town, visited the old county auction house, stopped by the closed-down feed store where Carter used to drop by once a week like clockwork. It was like chasing smoke. Everyone knew something, but no one would say much. Too afraid. Or too complicit. One night, he came home later than usual. The porch light was still on. Sophie was curled up on the swing, Storm lying nearby in the grass. She looked up when he stepped out of the truck. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan sat down beside her and looked at Storm. "I think he remembers everything." She nodded. "Sometimes I can feel it too, like when he stands real still, but his eyes get all tight, like he's somewhere else. He's not just any horse, Soph." She looked at him, waiting. "I think he was part of something bigger, something bad, and he made it out." She leaned her head against his arm. "You think maybe he's the reason all this is coming out now?" Ethan looked out across the field. "I think maybe he's the reason we finally see it." Storm was changing, slowly. He stood taller now, ate more, started responding to his name with a flick of his ear. He still didn't like men other than Ethan getting close, and loud noises made him shiver, but he no longer flinched when Sophie touched his flank, even near the old scars. One morning, while Ethan was mending a gate, he caught Storm watching him work, just standing there, still as stone, eyes fixed on the hammer in Ethan's hand. Ethan raised the tool and paused. Storm didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched, and then just barely nodded once, like he was saying, "I trust you now." Ethan put the hammer down, walked over, pressed his hand against the long scar down Storm's shoulder, and for the first time since the night that changed everything, Storm leaned into him. Not hard, not desperate, just a quiet press. A thank you. A hello. A beginning. It was just past midnight when Ethan stepped outside for a breath of air. The house was quiet, Sophie asleep upstairs, Storm stretched out in the grass by the barn. The moon was out that night, fat, full, casting a silver glow over the whole yard like a pale lantern. Even the wind had gone still, like the world was holding something in its chest. He walked to his patrol car, mostly out of habit, checked the lock, leaned against the hood, arms folded. Old muscle memory from his city days. You never let your guard down too far, not even in a sleepy town like Clearbrook. That's when he saw it. Folded under the windshield wiper, just a sliver of paper, barely held in place. He pulled it loose and unfolded it. "If you want to know who's really behind this, meet at the South Quarry. The horse'll show the way." No name, no signature, no threat. Just a message that felt like a trap and a clue rolled into one. His first instinct was to crumple the damn thing and toss it. Whoever wrote it either knew too much or wanted to bait him into doing something stupid. But then his eyes drifted across the yard. Storm, asleep but restless, ears twitching even in the stillness, like he was already listening. Ethan clenched the note in his fist, then walked back into the house, grabbed his coat, a flashlight, and his badge. He didn't tell Sophie, didn't wake her, didn't say where he was going. Just slipped out into the dark like the old days, when silence was part of the job. Storm didn't hesitate. When Ethan opened the barn gate, the old gelding lifted his head immediately. Not in confusion, not even in greeting, just understanding. Ethan clipped on the lead rope and held it loose. "You know the way, don't you?" Storm bumped his shoulder once with his nose. Then he turned toward the trees and started walking. The woods were colder than Ethan expected. The moonlight filtered down through the pines in streaks, making everything look a little older than it was. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath their boots and hooves, and the occasional shift of something small in the underbrush. Storm walked with purpose. Not fast, but sure. They passed the ridge, followed the old fence line behind the mill, then veered left down a trail Ethan barely remembered from his childhood. His uncle used to take him down this way to fish, back before the quarry shut down. It took almost half an hour before they reached the clearing. The South Quarry hadn't been touched in years. Most folks didn't even remember it was there. Rock walls loomed high on either side, forming a half circle around a wide gravel pit, now overgrown with weeds and scattered metal scraps. A rusted-out loader sat at the edge, one wheel buried in the dirt, and in the center, hidden from plain view, was a perimeter of makeshift fencing wood planks nailed together, barbed wire draped along the top like a warning. Inside, cages. And horses. Too many. Storm stopped at the edge of the brush, muscles tense, ears flat. Ethan crouched low, heart pounding slow but hard. He raised the flashlight, kept the beam low, sweeping the area. More than a dozen horses, some thin to the bone, others bearing open wounds, flanks heaving even while standing still. One mare looked ready to foal but too weak to lie down. Water buckets were black with algae. No hay, no shelter. It hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. He had seen crime scenes. He had seen what people were capable of. But this was slow death, organized and deliberate. He moved closer. That's when he saw them. 3 men sitting near a burn barrel on the far side, its light flickering weakly against the trees. The one in the middle sat with a crooked confidence, like he owned the place, leaning back on a folding chair with one boot propped on a rock, his voice carried low through the air. Ain't no one comin' up here after dark. Town forgot this place even exists. The second man, a lanky figure with a leather vest and ratty beard, nodded, sipping from a bottle. Then the third man stood, and Ethan's stomach turned. Vince Jargo. He hadn't seen him in over a year. Used to be a mechanic in town. Got mixed up in backroom fights and dirt deals. Had his nose in everything illegal that didn't bleed too loud. He'd always kept it just clean enough to avoid real trouble. Until now. Ethan stepped out of the shadows. Vince turned, slow and easy, like he already knew who'd shown up. Well, I'll be damned, Vince said, smiling thinly. Didn't think you'd actually come, Miller. Ethan kept his hands visible. This how you make your money now, Jargo? Vince shrugged. Man's gotta eat. Horse don't pay taxes. This is illegal and cruel. These animals, they ain't your concern, Vince said, cutting him off. You wearing a wire? No. Then I'll give you one warning, cop to cop. Vince's smile faded. Turn around. Forget what you saw. The other men shifted. One cracked his knuckles. The other stepped forward slightly. And then Vince added, low and slow. You got a daughter, right? Sweet kid. Sophie, ain't it? Ethan's blood froze. He didn't speak. Didn't blink. But something behind his eyes went cold. Storm let out a sharp whinny behind him. Loud. Defiant. He stomped once, hard enough to send dirt flying, and pawed at the ground. Vince looked past Ethan at the horse and laughed once. Would you look at that? He remembers. Hell, he should. We broke him good. Funny thing, he was meant to be sold off with the others. Guess someone had a soft spot. Ethan stepped forward. Don't talk about him. Vince's eyes narrowed. You should have stayed on your porch, Miller. This ain't your fight. I made it mine the second I saw those cages. You don't have proof. I've got enough to bury you. Vince tilted his head, smile back, but harder now. We'll see. But just know, accidents happen, especially in quiet little towns with pretty little girls. Storm snorted again. The tension in the air was sharp enough to cut skin. Ethan backed away, slow. You so much as come near my family, you'll wish you'd been locked up. Vince didn't follow, didn't say another word, just stared, and smiled. Ethan turned, put his hand on Storm's lead rope. We're leaving. They walked back into the trees, heart hammering in his throat. What he didn't know was that someone had followed him. Back at the house, the kitchen light was on. Sophie's hoodie was missing from the coat hook, and her bike was gone from the porch. Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped into the living room and sawed a crumpled jacket behind the curtain, a trail of dirt on the floorboards. She'd followed him, and he hadn't even noticed. He rushed back outside, scanning the tree line, then froze. There she was, standing at the edge of the woods, just inside the shadows. Storm was beside her now, having veered off to stand by her as if nothing else in the world mattered. She was pale, silent. Ethan walked to her, slow. You followed me, he said. She nodded, too stunned to cry. I had to, she whispered. I saw them. I heard him say my name. Ethan knelt down in front of her, hands trembling, heart pounding in his ears. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have locked the door. I should have told you." Sophie threw her arms around him. "I was scared," she said, "but I wanted to be there if something happened. I didn't want you to face it alone." Ethan held her close. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Storm snorted behind them, and Ethan turned to the horse. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. Storm just stood there, tail swishing, body still like a sentinel in the night. Back inside, Ethan poured a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Sophie curled up on the couch, her face pale but her eyes wide awake. He stared at the crumpled note still in his hand. "Things are about to change," he said quietly. Sophie didn't say anything for a while. Then, "Will it be dangerous?" Ethan nodded once. "Yeah, probably." She looked at him. "But we're not stopping, right?" Ethan smiled, a tired small thing. "No," he said. "We're not." Out in the barn, Storm let out one long, low breath, then lowered his head. The fight was only just beginning. The storm rolled in like it had something to prove. Ethan stood under the tool shed awning, staring out at the field as thick gray clouds swallowed what little light the day had left. Thunder cracked low and mean, somewhere to the west, and the air smelled of dust and iron, like the earth itself was bracing for something ugly. In his hand was the warrant signed and sealed just an hour ago by Judge Callahan, who hadn't asked a single question once he saw the photos. Storm stood nearby, reins tied loosely to the trailer gate. His coat twitched in the wind. His ears were up, his whole body still, like he could hear something moving just beneath the thunder. Sophie stood beside him, her arms crossed, her raincoat flapping in the gusts. Her hair was already soaked from the brief walk across the yard. "You can't come with us, Pumpkin," Ethan said for the third time. She didn't argue, not this time. She just looked at him with that stare, the same one her mother used to give him when she knew he was making the wrong kind of decision for the right kind of reasons. "I'll stay in the truck," she said. "I swear. I need to be there. For Storm. For Shadow. I need to see this through." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. The wind blew harder. Trees groaned in the distance. "Sophie, this could go sideways real fast." "I know," she said, "but I still have to be there." He looked at her for a long second, then down at Storm, who had shifted closer to Sophie, nudging her gently with his muzzle like he agreed. Ethan blew out a breath. "Fine. You stay inside. You don't move until I say. You understand me?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." "Okay, then." He kissed the top of her head. "Stay low. Stay quiet." The convoy was small, 2 unmarked cruisers, a livestock trailer for emergency evac, and 1 heavy-duty pickup carrying the bolt cutters and backup. Deputy Carla Boone was riding shotgun in Ethan's truck. She checked the slide on her weapon twice before they even left the paved road. "You really think they'll fight back?" Ethan kept his eyes on the winding dirt trail ahead. The rain was coming harder now, sweeping sideways across the windshield. Wipers slapped uselessly. "They've got too much to lose," he said. "I think they'll fight like hell." Behind them, Sophie sat curled in the back seat, arms wrapped around Shadow, who shook with nerves but didn't make a sound. Storm rode in the trailer, silent, waiting. The radio crackled. Visual on the South Ridge fence. "It's up, no movement yet." "Copy," Ethan said. "Go dark. We approach on foot." They parked at the edge of the quarry and killed the engines. The storm was in full swing now, lightning flashing hard enough to white out the treetops. Thunder rolled over them like freight trains. The smell of wet soil and sweat was thick. Storm was already stamping the ground before they got his lead rope clipped. "He knows," Sophie whispered, watching from the window. Ethan leaned in the open door. "You stay here. I'll come back for you. I promise." Sophie nodded, her hand gripping Shadow's collar tight. Ethan turned to Storm. "All right, big guy. Show us the way." The old gelding moved fast for his age, even in the muck. His hooves sunk into the wet ground, but he pulled forward with purpose, leading Ethan and the others down the old trail and into the hollow where the makeshift compound waited. Carla and Reese flanked left. The 3rd unit moved right to cover the far end. Ethan gave the signal. They crept down in silence, boots slipping in mud, Storm keeping low. The fencing came into view. Even through the downpour, Ethan could see the outlines dozens of horses, crammed into 2 small pens, some lying down in the mud, others shaking from cold and fear. No shelter, no feed, just rust and waste. He saw the silhouettes of 3 men near the burn barrel. Vince was there, leaning back in the same fold-up chair, cigarette glowing like a firefly. Ethan raised his hand. Carla nodded. Reese moved. They breached the compound, fast bolt cutters snapping, boots pounding through puddles, weapons drawn. Hands in the air! Do it now! Vince spun, startled. The other 2 men ran. Reese tackled one. Carla dropped the second with a knee to the back. Vince didn't run. He just smiled. Well, hell, he said over the wind. Didn't think you had the spine, Miller. Ethan walked toward him, gun steady. Get down. Or what? You gonna shoot me in front of your daughter? Ethan's pulse jumped. She's not here. Oh, she's here, Vince said, smiling wider. Little shadow behind you, isn't she? And then it happened. From behind the supply shed, a 4th man emerged, a knife glinting in his fist, aimed not at Ethan but toward the trailer in the distance. Toward Sophie. She'd left the truck. Ethan turned too late. The man was already running, boots splashing, blade raised. Sophie was halfway into one of the cages, trying to help a bleeding mare when she turned and screamed. The man lunged, and then Storm moved. He broke free of the rope like it was thread, thundered across the field in 3 massive strides, and slammed his entire body into the attacker's chest. The man flew backward, crashing into the mud. The knife skittered away. Storm reared, hooves pawing the air. But he didn't stomp. He didn't kill. He stepped between Sophie and the man, head low, teeth bared, guarding her with every ounce of his broken, battered frame. Ethan reached them seconds later, tackled the man to the ground, cuffed him with hands still shaking. Sophie was crying, but unhurt. The mare beside her was bleeding from her side, breath shallow. I need help here, she yelled. Reese and Carla moved fast, cutting locks, clearing pens. It took 20 minutes, but every last horse was freed. The worst cases were loaded into the emergency trailer. 2 needed to be euthanized on the spot. Ethan said the prayer himself, hand on their heads. Vince and the others were cuffed, soaked, and silent by the time the rain began to let up. No one spoke much as the trailers rolled away. The wind was lighter now, the storm fading, but something else had broken. The silence, the secrecy, the chain. Ethan stood with Sophie under the barn awning later that night. Storm and Shadow were lying close together in the straw, eyes half closed. The vet had given them both a clean bill. Storm had a bruised shoulder, but nothing more. Sophie leaned her head against her father's side. Do you think it's over? Ethan wrapped an arm around her. Maybe the worst part, he said, but not all of it. She looked up. Do you think we helped? He looked down at her. Really looked hair plastered to her forehead, clothes still damp, face pale but eyes sharp. You helped more than I ever could have, he said. And for a long while, they just stood there, listening to the rain slow to a whisper. Storm lifted his head, looked at them once, then closed his eyes again. And somewhere in that quiet, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Maybe not forever, but enough to keep going. Enough to begin again. The house was quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that wrapped itself around a man like an old quilt, soft, warm, and full of stories stitched in its silence. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, his coffee long gone cold, the case file spread open in front of him one last time. The final page, the report confirming what Storm had once been, lay centered under his hand, slightly smudged from where his thumb had rested too long. Name, unregistered codename, X14. Breed, American Quarter Horse. Unit, Border Patrol. Retired. Status, decommissioned due to injury. Disposition. Transferred to private ownership, Joseph Carter. There was a picture stapled to the corner, grainy, old, but unmistakably Storm, younger, broader in the chest, coat shining like black glass, eyes sharp. A working horse, trained for high-risk environments. A rescuer, a protector. Ethan didn't have to imagine how it ended. He knew. The limp, the scars, the silence in Storm's eyes that spoke louder than any scream. He had seen men come back like that, broken not just in body, but in how the world stopped seeing them as useful. One bad fall, one wound that didn't heal the right way. And just like that, they were forgotten. The room at the station was cold, but Ethan didn't shiver. Joe Carter sat across from him, cuffs on, hands resting on the steel tabletop like he had all the time in the world. The years hadn't aged him much, same sharp nose, same narrow eyes, same bitter mouth. What had changed was the way he carried himself. There was no swagger now. Just exhaustion and something mean that settled behind his teeth. Ethan slid the photo across the table. Joe didn't touch it. "That yours?" Ethan asked. Joe glanced down. "Was." Ethan waited. Joe finally said, "Bought him cheap, real cheap. Guy who sold him didn't want to deal with the leg. He was a service horse," Ethan said. "Saved people's lives." "Not my problem," Joe replied flatly. "By the time I got him, he was damn near useless. Couldn't carry a pack, couldn't pull weight, spooked at loud noises, waste of hay." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you beat him?" "I did what needed doing." "You chained him, starved him, turned him into something that could barely stand." Joe leaned back, shrugging. "One more broken animal in a world full of 'em." Ethan stood up, slow, measured. "You ever think the only difference between a man and an animal is whether someone gave him a second chance?" Joe smirked. "You think that horse is some kind of hero? He's a tool. Worn out, you're just soft." Ethan leaned in, voice low. "He still protected someone, still saved my girl, still stood when every bone in his body told him not to. That horse has more honor in one hoof than you've had your whole life." Joe looked away, and Ethan walked out. Back home, the sun broke through the trees in thin beams of gold. The rain from the night before still clung to the grass, and a soft breeze carried the scent of wet soil and hay. Sophie stood in the yard with Storm, gently brushing his coat. Ethan approached them slowly, something tucked under his arm. "What you got there, Daddy?" she asked, eyes curious. Ethan unwrapped a small wooden plaque, shaped like a shield. The metal plate on it gleamed silver under the light, and one word had been engraved deep and true. "Valor." Sophie touched it gently. Ethan stepped closer, held the plaque out. "For him," he said. "For what he's done. For what he is." Storm didn't react right away. He just blinked, ears twitching in the breeze. But when Ethan stepped forward and buckled the small medallion onto Storm's halter, the horse lowered his head just a little. A gesture of trust. A thank you. Sophie leaned in, arms wrapping around his neck. "I promise," she whispered, "I'll never let anybody throw you away again." Weeks passed, then months, and something new began to take root behind the Miller house. Where once there'd been an old paddock, half falling, with broken fencing and weeds waist-high, now there stood a series of sturdy stalls and open grazing fields. Volunteers came by on weekends, neighbors, kids from town, even a few former officers Ethan had served with, folks who didn't know how to fix the world, but knew they could mend something smaller. They called it the Wind's Home, a name Sophie chose one night after sitting under the stars. "Because wind always finds its way back," she said, "and so do the broken." Storm became the soul of the place. He wasn't the fastest, or the strongest, or the prettiest anymore, but he was the one every other horse followed. When a new rescue came in too wild to approach, it was Storm who stood nearby, calm and steady, until the trembling stopped. Shadow grew fast, quirky, loud, and a little too brave for his own good. But he never strayed far from Sophie's side. And Ethan, he learned to breathe again. He still woke early, still checked the locks, still watched the tree line some nights like old habits had roots deeper than memory. But he also laughed again. He built fences with his daughter. He learned the names of every horse that passed through. He drank coffee slow on the porch and read Sophie's school essays out loud when she asked. And sometimes, when no one else was watching, he'd lean against Storm's shoulder and just stand there, not speaking, just thankful. It was early summer when they held their first adoption day. The sky was clear, the breeze warm, and the smell of cinnamon buns from Mrs. Boone's kitchen lingered in the air. Families came from 3 towns over. Children giggled in the grass, horses snorted, tails flicking, curious but calm. Some horses left that day. Some stayed. Storm stood on the rise by the fence, watching it all, Shadow nipping playfully at his heels. Everyone asked if Storm was up for adoption. Sophie's answer was always the same. "He lives here," she'd say with a smile. "This is his home." And nobody argued. They could see it in the way Storm stood tall, quiet, proud, like a statue built from bone and memory, a monument to survival. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the last car pulled away, Sophie sat on the porch steps with a sketch pad in her lap. Ethan was in his chair, boots off, sipping sweet tea and staring out across the pasture. She flipped the drawing around. It showed 5 figures beneath a wide, open sky. A man, a girl, a small dog, and 2 horses, all standing beneath an oak tree. Above them, the wind curled through the branches, carrying with it the phrase she'd written in blocky, careful letters. Where the wind stops, we begin again. Ethan stared at it for a long time. His voice cracked a little when he spoke. "That's our miracle," he said. Sophie leaned against him. "Yeah," she whispered. "It is." Out in the field, Storm stood still on the highest hill, mane blowing softly. He looked out across the land, then down at the house. And for a moment, in the last light of day, he seemed to shine not with fire, not with glory, but with quiet peace. He was not forgotten. He was not broken. He was home.